Let's get into how trauma affects, let's hone in on this vulnerable moms who are in crisis, moms who may feel like they're in imminent danger, who are at risk of losing their children into the foster care system, and some moms with children in foster care.
Mhm.
How does trauma affect the most vulnerable and their children? And I will point out that every mother that comes through the EMA program, we do a comprehensive assessment of, and we're able to get her trauma score. And so for advocates on this call, what do they need to know about if a mom has experienced severe or significant trauma? How has that affected her?
Oh, hugely. So again, to hone in on early trauma and or like childhood trauma, right? Well, okay, let me start with this. The biggest indicator of, and you all probably know this information as well, and then just the nature of what you do. The biggest indicator of children coming into the foster care system is mom's history with child welfare.
Mm,
Right. And so it's like because it becomes very cyclical. Because if I was raised in that and that's all I know, it's going to take a lot of work or effort to change that. Because all of us, trauma or not, we parent the way we were parented, right? Like
right.
it's how it works, right? Unless we're mindful and really do a lot of work to change the things we didn't like or that weren't helpful or safe, and to maybe maintain what was good and beneficial. So I think about this is certainly an assumption on my end. I'm assuming a lot of the women you're serving have had histories touching child welfare.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge impact. So that's just something to be mindful of, right? Of, okay, well, how do we pay attention to that? How do we, of course, lean in and support in the best ways we know how? But just on a trauma side of the impact for, well, one, if mother had a history of child welfare early on, and or if child welfare never got involved, but
Mm-hmm.
home was not safe, was scary, was unpredictable, was chaotic, was disruptive, those things absolutely impact our brain development, our relational development, our emotional development, right? Touches all of how we grow and develop. And therefore, I've actually seen in a lot of my work where, of course, these women are doing the best that they can with what they've been given, while also recognizing a lot of the women I've served, they haven't been given a lot early on.
Mm,
So they don't have a lot to work with. They're not bad people. They're not bad parents. They're not malicious. They're
mm-hmm.
also not hopeless, right? Like there's a lot that we can do in one, loving them, seeing them, caring for them, but also giving, of course, those practical supports. But I think about the trauma component being the way they think is going to be different.
Mm.
The way they problem solve is going to be different. The way they maybe assess priorities in problem solving, right? It might be
Right.
different than me, an observer or a helper or an outside person might be like, oh, no, this is where we need to start. But maybe they're fixated over here, right? It just disrupts so much if there's early trauma. So in my line of work, again, a lot working with kids, in the foster adopt space or the adoptive families. My roles have not been hands-on with the biological families as much. So that's where you all have a line of expertise that I don't even. But something that I'm mindful of is in the nature of who I've served, there's this kind of general rule of thumb that if there was early childhood trauma for this teen, this young adult, this person in their 50s, there's a level of understanding that when we know trauma disrupts development, they may be chronologically 32 years old, but they might function emotionally, developmentally, all of those things, relationally, closer to about half their age. So maybe, let's say you're working with a 32-year-old woman, and in your life, you have other 32-year-olds in your life, they can maintain this, they can hold these jobs, they can care for their kids to this capacity. But maybe with this woman who's had a really traumatic or hard or chaotic early life experience, she might function more like a 16 or 17-year-old.
Mhm.
Again, not a bad person, not malicious, not hopeless. But it's helpful when we have that lens. So for me, I've often worked with the kiddos. That's been a lot of my role. And I remember actually working with, there was a kiddo who had a disrupted adoption. And when he first came to work with me, he was about, I think 9 or 10 years old, but he also was a big kid. Like he was tall, he was broad,
Mm.
but he also looked older, right? So when I'm looking at him, I'm thinking, you should be able to XYZ behavior, track with me when we're problem solving or whatever, right? So I certainly walked in with a list of expectations. But the more I worked with him and the more I learned about his story little by little over a couple years, I remember that light bulb moment of when I learned this concept of the chronological age versus developmental and emotional age, when that clicked for me. And I was like, this, at this point now he was about 11. I realized he liked playing with toys that were more appropriate to like my 4 or 5-year-old nephews,
Wow.
like toy dinosaurs and a dinosaur book, right? Like
Mhm.
things that matched. When I just looked at his level of play and engagement,
Mhm.
it clicked for me of, oh, I'm expecting this list. He's
Mhm.
functioning here. So what does that look like for me to shift my expectation, shift the way I communicate, the way I maybe ask questions, the way I engage, the way maybe I'm playful with him at a different level, right? Like I would adjust my playfulness to a 4 or 5-year-old versus a 11, 12-year-old,
Mhm.
right? And so that's an example of what it looked like with a child. Kind of the same principle if we're working with adults of not that you're going to talk to them like they're 4 years old,
Right.
or treat them like they're an adolescent who knows nothing. That's not what I mean. I
Mhm.
mean, shifting your expectations and maybe even asking and checking in on to what level are they able to complete this thing I'm asking for,
Mhm.
problem solve in the way I think should be easy in this situation. Um, does that make sense? Of course, maybe later we can get into some examples, but just that concept I think is big.
100%. And I think that many of us would say that we've experienced that already early on.